Okay. I believe we are up and running. Let me just make sure I see that little note he turned from private to public. Yep. Should be good to go. Let me let those folks in Discord and Twitter know as well. All right.
Got the link in it.
Okay. All right. Should be squared away here now. Let me just do one more quick check. Everybody who jumps in here and there knows I regularly deal with some type of tech thing that I have to figure out. But I think we are squared away. All right. As folks are trickling in, welcome to another episode of Facemask Fantasy. Got a special guest joining us today, Aaron Larson, staff writer for the Fantasy Footballers. I think a lot of people know about that one. No explanation needed. Also an ECR, expert consensus rankings contributor for Fantasy Pros. First and foremost, Aaron, appreciate you jumping on today. Thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I kind of mentioned backstage before we got on here, this is the first live video I've been on during the draft season, so I'm excited for this.
Awesome. No, looking forward to it. Should be a good conversation today. It's going to primarily be about players that, Aaron, you're higher on than consensus and also maybe lower on than consensus. And we talked about this for a couple days leading up to today. And I'm in agreement with a lot of guys that I think you believe in this season. And then I think I have some other, we're like anything, like any two people that kind of evaluate this situation, these players in this space. We may have some disagreements, but that's what the beauty of this type of dialogue is to help people kind of navigate these waters, navigate the redraft rankings, because relying solely on ADP can only get you so far. It's where you can find separators, so to speak, guys that make sense for your team, higher than consensus, or, take them above ADP, so to speak. And just being plugged in the sense of the ebb and flow of the NFL, the vibes, trends that you get from training camp, the teams that's, from one season to the next. Some things you can take from last season, some things you have to throw out entirely. And so hopefully we can help navigate that today. So I think I pretty much covered that.
Sounds good.
Cool. So why don't we go ahead and get right into it? Good to see a couple people starting to come in already. Obviously, let me know if there's anything that you guys have any issues with. I always have to potentially work on some stuff on the fly, but I think we're all squared away. With that kind of said, why don't we jump in on some players we wanted to talk about? I figure it makes sense, Aaron, to just kind of go down the traditional quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end. We can, of course, keep this conversation fluid. I'll keep an eye on the chat if any of our members have any specific questions that they want to ask. But why don't we kick things off with the quarterbacks? I know that there's a couple of guys that you are higher on than some. We could start there and then maybe eventually make it to guys who you're maybe lower on than consensus.
Cool.
I'll tee it up. I know the first guy that you are interested in is probably the most enticing rookie for fantasy purposes this year. I think that's still the case. I think you're higher than most, not by a significant amount, but slightly. I think you're pretty optimistic about Anthony Richardson this year. Everybody's favorite fantasy rookie quarterback.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is like perfect timing. I just finished writing an article that's going to go live tomorrow or Thursday on the Ballers website. But we do a writer series called the Fantasy Court, where writers pick guys they're higher, kind of just like this, but in article form. And I'm making the case for Anthony Richardson. So I just got done doing a bunch of research on him. I was already pretty high on him just based on the athleticism. Literally the most athletic quarterback ever entered the NFL since we've had those kind of metrics. But what's really interesting is I got a whole list of every quarterback drafted in the top 10 since 2011 and look at their fantasy stats and all this and all that. And it's, everything from Cam Newton to like Blaine Gabbert to Josh Rosen. Like there's good in there and there's a lot of bad in there. But when you filter it to quarterbacks who had 80 or more rushes, you got Cam Newton, you got RG3, you got Kyler Murray, and you got Josh Allen. All three of the four of those were top 12 quarterbacks as rookies. The only one that wasn't was Josh Allen. He missed 4 games in the middle of the season. And when he came back, if you remember his rookie season, he was on fire at the end of his rookie season. It was something like 24 fantasy points a game. So everything we're hearing, the draft capital, the camp reports, it sounds like Richardson's going to get that job. And if he does, he's going to carry the ball at least 80 times, probably over 100 times. So that statistically, historically bodes really well. And then the other piece of it that marries together so well is getting to work with Shane Steichen, the new head coach for the Colts. He was the quarterback or the offensive coordinator for Justin Herbert in 2020, his rookie season. So being able to develop a young quarterback. Then he went to Philly in 2021 and 2022, and we know what Jalen Hurts has done since then. So I think when I last checked, he was being drafted as the quarterback 12. I really think that's his floor. I think that top 6 quarterbacks is in his range of outcomes, depending on how the season goes. But I think he's still being drafted at his floor right now with room to go up.
Pretty good group of names that he's in company with based on where he was drafted and his, I guess, rushing upside that he brings to the table. At least as of today, right now, he's got an ADP of 104 on Underdog Fantasy. So that's actually currently the QB 11. So I guess maybe he's bumped up a couple of spots over Dak, who is the QB 12.
Nice. Yeah. And it's really interesting to see as we start to get other ADP, because I relied on Underdog all summer long, but now we're starting to get, so like the Ballers, for instance, reference sleeper ADP. So that's kind of my go-to for redraft stuff. I think it's probably not great right now, but it's going to just be getting sharper and sharper as August goes on.
Sure. I can pull that up as well, just to cross-reference things. I guess I naturally tend to look at Underdog just because I'm in that app 12 times a day. If minimum, that's my floor, number of times I log into that app. I mean, I don't really see a lot of reason not to be optimistic about Richardson. The rushing upside that he brings to the table speaks for itself. And we also kind of see this trend with young quarterbacks who are, I guess, thrown to the wolves, so to speak. They often have to overcome for the lack of talent that is around them on offense, and therefore more is put on their plate in the form of running. So I have to imagine, 80 or so carries. Yeah, that's got to be somewhere around a floor projection.
That's, I think I don't have it in front of me. I think that's like 5.5, 6 carries a game, which, I mean, that's definitely floor level for him.
Sure, especially if Jonathan Taylor's not with the team.
That's a fun saga to follow.
That's a whole other can of worms. But I mean, if he's not on the roster, I think that just adds more to Anthony Richardson's plate sooner out of necessity.
Especially, maybe they won't be down there as often, but when they are in goal line situations, make a lot more sense for him to carry it when you don't have JT back there to give it to.
Sure, exactly. I mean, as of right now in the backfield, they're relying on some combination of Zach Moss whenever he is able to come back from the broken arm that he suffered last week in practice. Evan Hall, who's a 5th round rookie this past draft, and Deion Jackson, who I believe was an undrafted free agent for them a couple of years ago, and he's been kind of meh, so to speak.
It is interesting that just not too long ago there was a report that Kareem Hunt was going to sign with the Saints. They backtracked that, and now he's going to visit the Colts tomorrow. So saga continues.
It's more unknown for the Colts backfield, but I think that lends credence to more is going to be put on Anthony Richardson's plate sooner. 1, out of necessity, and 2, they probably want to fast track him anyway, as much as they possibly can without giving him too much. I mean, this is the future of their franchise that we're talking about here.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I got to double check his ADP on Sleeper, but with his ADP of around 104 on Underdog, obviously that's best ball. So the format, or, the strategy changes a little bit over there, but theoretically you're talking about in a 12-team draft, that's around the 9th round. Is it fair to say you would take him a round higher than that? Like,
yeah, I would, because at that point, we're talking 8th round. I've gotten a couple receivers and running backs at that point that I like. Maybe I've gotten tight end depending on where it falls. But this isn't my favorite strategy. I guess you got to know your league.
Sure.
And if I'm in a league where a lot of teams do draft 2 quarterbacks, I'll take Ryan Tannehill at the end of the draft. I'll take Geno Smith late in the draft. Like, those guys are going to be fine. You have a safety net, and there's always it's a long season. So Richardson's a guy you can kind of wait and see him for a little bit while you have another guy that's safe.
Got an ADP of 101 on Sleeper, so we're splitting hairs there as far as the ADP. So yeah, that's around, if my math is serving me correctly, that's around the 9th round in 12-team leagues, maybe the 10th round in 10-team leagues. Yeah, I mean, that feels like a perfectly safe area to roll the dice on a guy who I think has significantly more upside than downside, and I can't imagine has to worry about holding off Gardner Minshew for his job. No disrespect to Minshew.
Yeah, I that's the story that's been getting a little bit of that. Oh, it's not for sure gonna. Gardner's a great backup, but it's not going to be. Yeah,
he's not their future. Let's put it that way. So I'm in lockstep with you on being a little higher than consensus on Richardson. Maybe I'm not going all the way down to the 7th round to get him. That might be a little steep, but by the 8th round, I think it's fair to start looking at him, especially if you haven't drafted a quarterback yet, or QB1 certainly in redraft. But and possibly a QB2 if you play best ball.
Yep.
Cool. Another guy you're high on is Daniel Jones.
Yeah. So I just think that, another year in Brian Daboll's offense. And I think that I know they it's been sort of a running joke this summer of all the slot receivers they're adding.
Yep.
But I think that's kind of the shotgun approach, that they're going to come out with more talented receivers than they had last year. Hodges maybe takes a step forward. I think Darius Slayton is constantly undervalued, and he has been very boom bust, but I think was better last year than a lot of people realize. But the biggest thing is Darren Waller, right? Like, it's going to be the true tight end one. And even the minicamp reports were so awful on Jalen Hyatt, but now all of a sudden he's gaining a little steam. He's a guy I actually did like a lot in the pre-draft process. So, I mean, it's inarguable. It's his best set of weapons he's ever had. It's a second year in a system of what a really respected offensive coach. And he still has that rushing ability too. So it's probably a more boring pick. It's funny because I actually have them in my rankings back to back, Richardson and then Jones right behind him. I think Richardson has a little bit higher ceiling, but Jones is probably just as safe.
Yeah, I guess, and you factor in the fact that he's got actual NFL experience under his belt right now. So maybe it's a little bit more natural to feel that he's safer at a slightly reduced cost. He's got an ADP, Jones does, of 114 on Underdog and then around 124 on Sleeper. So there is a bit of a discrepancy there.
Yeah, that's some big difference on Sleeper.
Yeah, about 10 spots or so cheaper on Sleeper. Now, of course, that's possibly because maybe people are taking their quarterbacks a little bit sooner in redraft, and therefore the QB2s are pushed down a little bit more. Just because people don't worry about those as much in a one quarterback redraft league. All of these ADPs, of course, are one quarterback. They're obviously going to be significantly higher in super flex leagues, but thought process here, remains the same. From a value perspective, he's very cheap. He's the QB 14 on Underdog. I think he's around that same range on Sleeper. The addition of Darren Waller is huge, and I would also throw in the fact that we know Saquon Barkley is going to play this year. Obviously, there's lots of
Mm-hmm.
running backs that are in limbo right now. Like, will they play? How many games will they play, if they play at all? Saquon took his name out of that cloudy mix, I guess, for lack of a better term. He's going to play. He showed up, signed came to terms with the Giants on money that he was happy with, that he was satisfied with, and so now he's going to play. I mean, that's to me the linchpin here, and in what keeps Jones interesting. Because we know he'll run. The weapons should be a little bit better, but from a pure talent perspective, that's his best playmaker that we now know is now going to be suiting up and playing alongside of him on game day. So that's huge for his value.
And he's arguably he's a passing game weapon too. He's not just a grinded out running back. So
right. Yeah. So he not only helps, keep the offense on the field, keep the offense moving, sustain drives,
keep the defense honest.
Yep, exactly. And he can boost Jones's numbers in the receiving game. Obviously 15 passing touchdowns from Daniel Jones isn't going to cut it. I think that's what his number was last year. So that number needs to go up. The Giants made the moves this offseason to theoretically see that happen, to see that come to fruition. The onus is now on Jones himself. I guess, what's the word I'm looking for? Question marks or any excuses about Daniel Jones and his performance up to this point in his career. It's now on his shoulders. Like you said, second year in Dayball's offense. He got paid. He's got probably his best collection of weapons since he entered the league, all things considered, with the addition of Waller, the drafting of Jalen Hyatt, some of the guys that they also added in free agency. I mean, the time is now for Daniel Jones, and the offensive line play. While it's still kind of a question mark, it's significantly better because Andrew Thomas has taken a sizable leap forward as one of the premier left tackles in the NFL. So all in all, the pieces are there in place for Daniel Jones. His ADP is still kind of in that boring range when it comes to quarterbacks. You can have him 100+ picks into a draft. I think the value is good there, all things considered. I'm happy to take him certainly 10 or 15 spots higher in sleeper, just because I think his ADP is so depreciated there. And then on underdog, maybe half a round, 7 to 8 spots higher than what it currently is, especially if I end up with Waller, maybe a round or so earlier.
Oh yeah. And this is a best ball take too, obviously, but with taking him in best ball, there you got so many late stacking options you can go with him, because none of those guys other than Waller have any significant ADP.
Right. Yeah, no, it's easy to grab like a Darius Slayton, probably in the 17th round. Maybe you go down into the 16th just if you have Jones and Waller, but Paris Campbell is in that conversation. Wan'Dale Robinson is in that conversation. These are easy stacks that you can build, and the ever important stack in best ball is something that you want to, at once you've established certain players on your team, it's something you almost kind of want to go out of your way to do.
Yep, for sure.
I think that's a pretty good strategy there with the Giants in what should be a pretty good offense relative to where I think people are treating them from an ADP perspective. So in lockstep with there, I'm happy to take Jones a little higher than consensus. You have a couple other quarterbacks that I think you're less keen on. We could kind of, however you want to do this, but whether it's Sam Howell or Aaron Rodgers, I think you're a little lower on consensus than those two. Their ADPs aren't super high. You're not spending the top dollar necessarily for either of these guys, but I think relative to consensus ADP, you're down on them a little bit.
I go back and forth on Howell, and honestly, if it's super flex, or if I took a safe quarterback, a little bit earlier, I see a ceiling there, because he's got the rushing floor, he's got some offensive weapons, but I can't see him being anything more than that. I don't think many people are drafting Howell to be their starting QB, but people are drafting Rodgers to be their starting QB. And I don't know. It all seems almost too good to be true. And I saw Rodgers play not well last year, and a lot of things have changed. Obviously, new team. I do believe in the talent of Garrett Wilson. this is way more narrative based, I guess, than anything, but it reminds me almost of like the super teams they build in the NBA with James Harden and Kevin Durant, and they're pretty good until they aren't. And Rodgers seems very, very happy right now. I'll tell you, as a Packer fan living in Wisconsin, I've seen how ugly it gets when he's not happy. And if they don't get off to a really great start, he's not going to be as happy. So I don't see the ceiling, and I see a floor.
A lot has to go right. And when you I can only imagine how much goes into, you spend, was it 17 years, 16, 17, 18 years with one team. And then, in your age 39 season, you switch to an entirely different situation with entirely different expectations. I think, what the Packers are expecting as far as goals for this year versus what the Jets are expecting. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of pressure for him to deliver and build rapport quickly with a collection of talent that I think a lot of people are high on. And that all hinges on the play of Aaron Rodgers. We're talking, Garrett Wilson is being drafted as a wide receiver 1. He has a tendency, Aaron Rodgers does, of not necessarily gelling with younger guys right away. We've seen those guys develop eventually.
Yeah. It's such a weird history, because I'm like,
right.
He hasn't, but also the Packers never drafted anybody like Garrett Wilson.
Sure.
So that was the narrative for his whole career, that I don't think they ever spent a first round pick on a wide receiver in his entire career.
No.
So
yeah. And of course you had players, exceed expectations.
Sure.
But that's from a development perspective, not necessarily.
And I just think
draft capital perspective.
Again, narrative based. Football is such a team chemistry sport.
Mm-hmm.
And okay, you've got some really talented guys in Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall when he's healthy, but then you bring in a whole new offensive style with Rodgers and then Zard coming in along and trying to mix this all together. Like, I don't know, it'll be interesting. Hard Knock starts tonight, so
right. That's another thing. There's just extra cameras in training camp right now, and it always feels like the vibes can be kind of funny with the Hard Knocks team. Whoever gets the luck of the draw, so to speak, on Hard Knocks. There's added pressure that comes with that. There's a reason that people want to see the Jets. There's, obviously Aaron Rodgers being on a new team for the first time in his career, but expectations are through the roof. So your margin for error is thin. So yeah, I guess a lot has to come together quickly for Aaron Rodgers, for him to pay dividends.
And I don't see this as the same as when Tom Brady went to the Buccaneers, because when he did that, he was throwing the ball 600, 700 times a season. I don't think the Jets want to do that now with Robert Saleh being the head coach.
Yeah, that's a good point. This is a team that probably, depending the health of Breece Hall, they want to run the football. And they have a good defense.
Yeah,
they have a defense that's expected to be, I think top 10 is a fair preseason expectation that the Jets have right now. So it could be low scoring affairs for the Jets. And to that point, that caps a potential ceiling for Rodgers. So he's got an ADP right now on Underdog of about 123. And then on Sleeper, it's 109. So significant difference there. So I guess if you get Garrett Wilson in best ball, then Rodgers isn't a difficult stack to build. That's one thing. But drafters are taking him at the with an ADP of 109 on Sleeper. That's a big difference.
This is even more wild to me right now, and maybe this will change. But looking at the ECR on Fantasy Pros, the expert consensus, Aaron Rodgers is at QB 15 and Anthony Richardson is at QB 17. That just seems backwards.
Yeah, I'd rather have Richardson just based on the rushing potential alone. I mean, we all know that's the cheat code of fantasy football is to find the guys who will run. And that's pretty much that's pretty much all there is to it as far as finding a quarterback value. If you don't go up and get one of the top guys, it's like, can he run? Yes.
Well,
okay. I'm interested. No.
like you
all
said,
right, I'm less interested.
Like you said, Daniel Jones threw 15 touchdowns last year. He's the quarterback 9 on the season.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's like, I just want the dude who will run. If he can average like 40 yards rushing on the ground, 35, 40 yards rushing on the ground, he chips in a couple of scores here and there. That's the guy I want over the 4,500 yard passer,
Oh, yeah.
So I hear you on that. I mean, his weapons are very good, assuming Breece Hall is able to come back healthy, maybe not right off the bat, but eventually. I mean, Garrett Wilson, Allen Lazard, Breece Hall, of course. There's decent ancillary talent there with Nicole Hardman, and I guess Ty Conklin is an intriguing player at tight end, but yeah, I mean, new situation, new surroundings, high expectations for a guy who, I guess we didn't even touch on this yet, by his standards, by Aaron Rodgers' lofty standards, didn't have the best season last year either. And I know he got a little banged up here and there, but you expect big years from Rodgers year in and year out at this point, and that didn't necessarily happen for him last year. So, there's a lot riding on this season for him, and I do sort of see like the path to a ceiling performance for him week in, week out is kind of a difficult one.
14.1 fantasy points per game last year. That was the lowest in his career by far. The second lowest was 17.4. I mean,
that's not good.
Granted, he played all 17 games and he was banged up a bit, but I mean, that's significantly lower.
Sure. Yeah. Under 4,000 yards passing. I think the most interceptions he's thrown probably over the past several seasons combined.
Career high. Yeah.
Right. By far. So, I mean, we'll see if his fortunes turn around in New York, but there is a lot riding against, maybe not necessarily success from a wins and loss perspective in the NFL, but from a fantasy perspective.
Yep, that's true too. They can be a good team without him being a gunslinger.
Exactly. Yep. So I'm definitely in agreement with, I'm not going out of my way to draft Aaron Rodgers unless I end up with Garrett Wilson in best ball. And even then, sure, I'm not going to reach to make that stack happen. If it happens organically, spectacular. If I feel like I have to go down a round and a half to get him, I'm probably going to look elsewhere.
Yeah.
And then was there anything else about Howell? I know you said you kind of go back and forth on him as far as where to put him.
No, I think I've honestly moved him up and down every time that I do this. Where do you land on for me right now? I've got him. It's down.
Okay. Yeah.
QB 24. So basically I view him as like my last draftable quarterback because I do think he has that lottery ticket upside. Again, we're doing a lot of best ball talk here. If I'm doing a 3 quarterback build, I love to have him as one of my 3 quarterbacks because I think he can have a game where he throws 2 touchdowns and run 2 touchdowns, and that's in the cards, but it's not going to be the norm.
Sure. So would you put him over the rookies like a CJ Stroud, Bryce Young?
To begin the year, yeah.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, from a draft standpoint.
Yeah, I mean,
and that's what's so funky. Sorry, with rankings at this time of year too. Like when I do my rankings, I think I've heard a lot of people talk about this. It really hit home with me. This isn't a list necessarily of how I think they're going to finish the season. It's a list of consistency, upside, how I want to start my season, and where I think they can take me. So
sure.
I have a hard time seeing it come to fruition, but I could see the path for it.
That makes sense. Yeah. I mean, he's intriguing from the perspective of he's free and he does have a decent collection of talent around him on offense. I perennially, I like Terry McLaurin. I know he's never cracked that, like, the conversation of who the top receivers are in the league, but I do think he's hyper talented. I love Jahan Dotson. I think he's awesome. The tight ends are interesting. I think they're currently devalued right now, but
I agree. I think people are leaving Logan Thomas for dead. He's not going to be great, but he can be a startable tight end in PPR leagues.
Sure. Yeah, he's right. Another guy who is just straight up free, who has flashed plenty of talent in the past. He's a little older at this point, and he's it's been an up and down career for him thus far. But I mean, you can have him for free. There are worse die rolls to take. And then for the backfield, I've always liked Antonio Gibson as a pass catcher out of the backfield. I always think he's been underutilized in Washington. So we'll see. Maybe Howell is the guy that brings a little bit more out of him. I do think Bijan Robinson's going to be utilized more as the running back, so to speak. So that maybe caps Gibson from opportunities there. But as a pass catcher, that boosts Howell. And then, of course, we'll see what happens. Eric Bieniemy, everybody's favorite guy who didn't get a job for the longest time. I mean, here's his opportunity to kind of, be the offensive coordinator without Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes.
That's going to be one of them. Like one of the things I'm looking forward most to watching those first 2 or so weeks of the regular season. They won't show their hand in preseason, but see how they utilize all those offensive weapons and see how it looks. That'll be fun to watch.
Yeah, no, it'll be exciting to see if he's able to, I don't know, unlock this Washington offense, so to speak, in a way that it hadn't been previously. So yeah, I guess the needle's not moved super far either way for me on Sam Howell. Probably going to go undrafted in a lot of shallow redraft leagues, your 10 and 12 redraft leagues. I can't imagine he gets picked up in one quarter in super flex. Different story. In one quarterback leagues, he probably goes undrafted. Maybe he's a waiver wire ad at some point during the season if he's able to also hold off Jacoby Brissett for the entirety of the season. They keep alluding to that's not even a foregone conclusion yet.
And that's another even just point to make. It's like, he's a guy that might not go drafted, but I'm paying attention to for that first week or two, because he could be a waiver wire scoop up right away.
Sure. Yeah. If he goes off, if he has a great game right away, I think they're playing the 49ers, I believe, week 1. I believe that's their week 1 opponent. So
that sounds right, which doesn't sound good for him.
Right. Obviously that's not the most ideal start. Oh no, excuse me. That might be their week. Maybe I have it flip flop. Maybe it's week 17. I believe they play Arizona.
Oh, well, that's
way more.
That's the exact opposite situation.
All right. Okay. Fire him up in DFS after all.
That's a DFS note right there.
Yeah, right. There you go. Yeah. Stash that one away for the start of the season. So, okay. So keeping Howell's a guy, maybe we're not moving too far up or too far down overall, but that week 1 spot is it's very favorable for him to potentially get off to a really good start. What's going on? I see some of my members coming in here already. Appreciate you guys coming in. I know the season is getting close. We're basically a month away. So just, hunker down for a little bit longer. We're close, guys. Any other quarterbacks we want to touch on?
I'll be really brief on it. I feel very similar to Kirk Cousins as I do with Aaron Rodgers.
Okay.
I think Minnesota, with their coaching and their play style, they're going to pass it more than the Jets will. But I think, and their defense is worse, but I think Cousins is just not as talented. So it was fun to watch that quarterback show. I loved it, but I just don't, again, I want that upside. I want those rushing floors, and he just doesn't bring that.
He doesn't. Yeah, he brings none of that to the table. He's being drafted as the QB. I think it's the QB. I guess it might be the QB 13 at this point. If Richardson is the QB 11, that's his
ECR at least. Yeah, and so it says that.
Yeah,
I'm not sure what
QB 13
Fantasy Pros uses here for their ECR, but yeah, says he's both. So that's higher than Richardson. So
yeah,
I'm not going to have him.
Yeah, that's I would disagree with that. I would absolutely prefer Richardson. I mean, he's got an ADP on Underdog of 112. So of course this is best ball. He finished, I think, as the QB 11 in points per game last year. So
it was pretty good.
I think that's a fair assessment that the drafters have of Kirk Cousins. Like, nobody's overreacting to the fact that he was in fact a QB1 in points per game last year, but he's the most. Is it fair to say he's like the best boring quarterback in the NFL, or from a fantasy perspective, at least? he brings nothing to the table as far as running the football. And he's prone to down weeks, especially, this is a narrative at this point, but if they're playing in prime time, you worry about Kirk Cousins.
Yeah.
He's obviously got the best receiver in the NFL to throw the football to, or one of them, in Justin Jefferson. He now has one of the best tight ends in TJ Hawkinson after the midseason trade. And we'll see if Jordan Addison can give something more than what a 33-ish year old Adam Thielen can give. Obviously, Thielen is the vet, the experienced guy who's been around the block. And maybe even if he loses a step, you still lean on his savviness as a veteran.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. They're just such different players, especially at this stage of their career, but they're built differently too.
Sure. Yeah. Can Addison give you an element of athleticism that Thielen doesn't, or he should be able to, but is that going to translate to separating and winning on a per route basis in a way that Thielen can, just because he's such a technician?
Yeah. He was so great in the red zone.
Sure. Right. That was another thing. He was essentially their big target for years. And their big touchdown scorer, especially when they were able to get into scoring position. So I think the collection of pass catching talent is there for Cousins. But yeah, he's just another one of those guys, especially in redraft, where it's like, why would I go out of my way to draft this guy?
Yeah,
he's good enough,
exactly.
Good enough to put up decent numbers, but at the end of the day,
I don't see him throwing 40 touchdowns.
No, he feels like a guy where you're kind of settling on a potential, like you're hoping for like a low end QB1 ceiling. And that just doesn't feel worth that juice doesn't feel worth the squeeze, so to speak.
There you go.
There I am with my random sayings. Okay. I think those are the quarterbacks that we had covered, or that we wanted to briefly touch on today. So with that, we can move on to the running backs, and obviously start with the fun part of the conversation, the guys that you are higher on than consensus. There's a couple guys in here I do believe I'm in lockstep with you on, but I'll give you the floor. I think we'll kick things off with Tony Pollard down in Dallas.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is not based on this narrative that came out so long ago about the Cowboys trying to run the ball more. I don't think maybe it'll be a slight uptick, but I don't think they're built to run the ball that much. But we've seen Pollard be great in the passing game. He's been honestly better than I expect him to be as a true rusher. And if they don't add anybody, then he's going to be the bell cow. He's going to be one of those rare Saquon Barkley types that don't come off the field until they're gassed. Mm-hmm. Dallas is still a good offense. And what was I listening to? I was listening to late round quarterback today, JJ Zacharyson.
Love JJ.
And it was either him or he had Rich Rebar on, but they made a great point that I never connected with. And they said it feels a lot like the year where Melvin Gordon left Denver. And everyone was like, I'm not really so sure about Eckler taking over here. And Eckler exploded. I'm like, that connected with me in a big way. So I was high on Pollard before that, and that's sort of strengthened that take. So, I honestly think we will, again, nobody else has added. You could very easily look back at the end of the season and be like, yeah, he should have been a first round pick.
Sure. Yeah. If he gets 75% of what Ezekiel Elliott used to get, at least as far as workload, and probably more of that is going to be targets than what Zeke would typically average for a season.
And there'll be better targets. Zeke would get the dump offs. Yeah. He was okay at that, but Pollard can run routes.
Pollard's a playmaker. Like, he's not a traditional running back, I don't think. Like, he should be OW, like offensive weapon. Like, that's just, that's the vibe that he puts out there when he's on the field. He just feels like he's not a traditional, you don't just call him a running back. You could line him up out wide if you really wanted to. I think he was in half PPR scoring, which I think is the default for most leagues these days. I think
that's what I always go to.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have moved off of standard. I know there are some Stone Agers out there who still believe in standard, but I think the general consensus is half PPR. He was the RB7 overall on the season. He was the
the last two games he missed.
Yeah, right. He missed week 17, and then he basically didn't play week 18. So, I mean, that number probably goes up. If you include Breece Hall and his brief but awesome stretch last year, Pollard was the RB8 in points per game. If you don't include Breece Hall because maybe you don't want to factor in the fact that he didn't play the whole season, then Pollard was also the RB7 in fantasy points per game last year in half PPR scoring. The guy was rock solid, had a couple down weeks, but who doesn't? But I mean, he had, multiple 30 burgers. He had a couple of 20-point performances. And when I say a couple, I mean, there were 3 of them in there. He had another with almost 18 points in week 2. I mean, the upside is through the roof. And again, this was all with Zeke still on the roster last year.
I was going to say, people
vulturing 12 touchdowns.
Yeah. Like Zeke he missed 2 games last year. It wasn't this all Zeke was in and out of the lineup. He was there.
Sure. Right. So, I mean, I think, I mean, his ADP, I think, is around 20 or so. Let me double check it on Sleeper.
I think it's somewhere in the second round.
Yeah, on Sleeper, it's 23.4. I mean,
That's
can have
move.
this. Yeah, you can have this guy right now at the 2-3 turn in 12-team leagues, at least in one quarterback. And it's even further back in Superflex formats. You can have Pollard in Superflex formats in the 3rd round. I mean, that's stealing, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think he's going to have a monster season. Now, I mean, Zach Martin is still holding out, obviously, an all-world guard. I think it's fair to label him something like that at this point, at this stage in his career. He's been spectacular over the course of his career. If he reports, great. If he doesn't, that hurts. But again, Pollard is such a weapon. I don't think you need to worry about necessarily one, as good as he is, one guy on the line with a guy like Pollard who can split out as much as he does and probably will be asked to do. So definitely like Pollard. I've drafted him a ton. I was definitely opting for Jonathan Taylor over him a couple of weeks ago, way more than I should have, but that's neither here nor there. I gotta reverse course, but that's okay. I think Pollard will be a 1st round pick in 2024 redraft. So he's a great value right now. And then I guess along the same wavelength, as far as how we expect these guys to get their production, you're high on Jahmyr Gibbs.
Absolutely. So it's funny how things changed. Pre-draft process, I was not super big on Gibbs. Wasn't sure where he was going to go, all these things. Even when Detroit first drafted him, I'm like, well, that was a silly pick. But then I went through, throughout like May, I work on actually projecting out the teams. And when it's spit out the rankings, I'm like, wait a minute, let me go back. And it's amazing how much of a difference targets make. Like running back targets are so valuable. And I just think he's going to get peppered with them. The hype is starting to catch up. So his ADP is rising, but these rookies, it's rookies going at that point of the draft typically should be going higher. People are still worried about them. Like, we have no worries about Bijan Robinson for the most part. Right. And I think that Gibbs was taken just a handful of picks later in the draft. He's got the same capital, totally different player, different situation. He's not going to get as many carries as a lot of running backs in the league, but he's going to, if we believe what we do, or what I believe, is he's going to get a lot of touches, especially with Hawkinson gone and Jameson Williams suspended. Like, someone's going to be needing to catch passes in that offense besides Amon-Ra, who is going to catch 1,000. But that's another story.
That's another story. Love that guy, by the way.
Yeah.
But DeAndre Swift is no longer in the picture, which maybe was going to be something that we expected anyway once they drafted him. But there's a lot of work available. Yeah, like you said, especially for those first 6 games while we wait for JMO to come back. Got an ADP of 35.5 on Underdog and 36 on Sleeper. So you can
Sleeper's right there with them.
Yeah, they're neck and neck, so to speak, or those ADPs are. I mean, so you can have him. You probably got to spend a late 3rd round pick if you really want to get him. He's not going to last to the 4th round, especially for anybody who probably around that range. I feel like is more likely to have started their draft wide receiver. So they are going to be looking for that balance to start their draft off with. So Gibbs is probably going to end up going by in 12 team one quarterbacks by the 309, by the 310. You're not going to be able to see him at the 403 or the 404. If you want him, you got to spend that late third round pick on him. And yeah, I mean, if we're going to boost guys who earn targets, Gibbs feels like he kind of did that with the draft capital alone. Yeah, they took him, I think it was 12th overall. But to be going, 23 or 4 spots higher than Bijan. In an offense that wants to throw the ball and needs pass catchers for at least the first third of the season. I like David Montgomery a lot, especially at his cost as well. But I've kind of done the same thing as well, where I was hammering David Montgomery earlier in the season, like, oh, ADP of 70 or 75, somewhere in that range. Like, that's going to be a great value, but they didn't draft Gibbs 12th overall to not utilize him as an offensive weapon, similar to, I think, how we just described Tony Pollard for Dallas.
Yeah, and I like Montgomery too. I'm ahead of the ECR on him as well. And I'm honestly surprised we haven't heard this, because I feel like anytime there's a running back combo, we get this comparison of Mark Ingram and Alvin Kamara in New Orleans. But this feels a lot like that to me.
Sure. It's a spectacular offensive line too in Detroit. So, there should be, they should be they should be paving lanes for Montgomery. They should be keeping Goff clean in the pocket more often than not, allow those routes to develop for Gibbs and Montgomery, who is a good pass catcher in his own right. He's proven that. I like both of these guys. I agree with you on Gibbs, though, as far as he was a guy that I was kind of like, on at the beginning of the season. I was just like, man, this feels so expensive for a rookie. And then I kind of, did the heel turn and was like, I don't know if this is expensive enough. I don't know if I think people are discounting, what he brings to the table just because he's not going to get 250 carries the way we expect Bijan to. So, very high on Gibbs. Very happy to take him at the end of the third round, regardless of what my makeup is. If I start 3 receivers, maybe I prefer to have 2 before I take Gibbs. If I go 1 and 1, like first round running back or second round receiver or vice versa, maybe I opt for that Keenan Allen, Jerry Jeudy range. That's where I want my, and then I'll see what happens or see what's available to me in the 4th or 5th round at running back. But if I start off wide receiver, Gibbs feels like a spectacular grab, like in that back half of the 3rd round range.
Yeah. Yep. And then it's definitely interesting just seeing how team builds are going so far this year.
I think a lot of people are playing 0 RB without realizing they're playing 0 RB, just because of the ADP of the wide receivers this year.
We see it. It's everything that's old is new again, it's
right.
It's always, you got to get a running back in the 1st round. And I don't think it's wrong. Everything that we looked at suggests that, you need to get your receivers early, but then these running backs are falling who are also very good. So,
right. It's like, it's not even 0 RB anymore. It's just modified. This is when you take your running backs.
Yeah. It's the whole dead zone conversation saying it's still there, but it's different rounds now. It's not, it starts later because they're all getting pushed down.
Right. Yeah. So it's like, just adjust accordingly. Gibbs feels like a great target with this like modified approach that people are kind of collectively taking in their drafts this year. So definitely like Gibbs, like Montgomery as well, but Gibbs, I think, was the main talking point here as a guy to be a little bit higher on. So to that final point here, if you want to spend, you have to spend a late 3rd on him. You might be willing, if you're maybe 4 or 5 spots higher than consensus on, to maybe go in that middle, maybe 304, 305-ish range if you need to grab him.
Yep, definitely.
There you go. One other guy we kind of already touched on that I'm just naturally going to be in lockstep with you on if you're higher on than consensus because I love him, is Antonio Gibson. Different circumstances than these other 2 guys because he does have a clear-cut guy who I think is going to consistently cap him in the form of carries in Bijan Robinson. But I love Gibson's upside as a pass catcher. I think you do as well.
Yep. Yeah. And we kind of mentioned it. And I want to see what this Eric Bieniemy offense looks like, how you take advantage of this, like you said, offensive weapon in Antonio Gibson.
I mean, tapered off last year in a big way. I don't know if that was just because the offense started to struggle. It's been quarterback play has been a bugaboo for Washington for a few seasons.
Yeah, they've just been kind of a mess.
Right. It's just been a struggle in Washington, but they have an enticing guy as their offensive coordinator now in Eric Bieniemy. That's the other thing. JD McKissick, who has been
he's gone.
He's been the thorn in Antonio Gibson's side from a production perspective, because if Bijan Robinson's going to take the carries and JD McKissick is going to take the third down work, then it's like, well, then why did you draft this super awesome weapon in the third round and then just to not use him? That is no longer the case. McKissick is out of the picture. You figure Gibson kind of steps into that role, and that makes him really enticing from a potential value perspective, and a guy that you can have still now, I think 100 picks into your one quarterback drafts.
Mm-hmm.
Let me see if I can just pull that up, but real quick. Yeah, 80. Okay, Sleeper's got him as an ADP of 95. So in 12-team drafts, you have to take him in the 8th round if you want him. I'm happy to do that, especially if, to that point, we're hammering wide receiver early, and now we're looking for some running back depth in the 6th, 7th, 8th rounds. He feels like a great target.
Mm-hmm. He's one of those guys that could break out.
God, I hope so.
A lot of us do.
I've been tooting the Antonio Gibson horn for a couple of years now, and last year it didn't come to fruition. I'm hoping this year things change with the departure of JD McKissick, the addition of Eric Bieniemy. We'll see if Sam Howell can bring any form of stability to the offense at the quarterback position. The opportunity is right in front of him now. I feel like this feels like a put up or shut up type of season for Antonio Gibson with McKissick out of the picture.
Yep, for sure.
Hopefully. Okay. I think before I get to some guys that we're potentially fading, these are some guys where definitely interested to hear your opinion on, because I think I'm coming around to them, but I'm definitely open to being sold a little bit more on them. I'll start with a guy who I'm certainly not alone in having loved Javonte Williams since he got drafted, but obviously last year's injury was devastating. Torn ACL, LCL, and MCL. We were initially thinking, I think it was week 4 or 5 he got hurt, that we were looking at like, oh, we're going to have to wait until 2024 for Javonte Williams. Every report has been alleviating a lot of concerns that people have. And you're feeling the same way?
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly why. I've been optimistic about Javonte the whole time, because maybe I'm a sucker for these reports, but
sure,
it wasn't just one. It was a positive drumbeat, and every time nobody was ever like, well, back off a minute. I know a lot of the medical experts in the field are still trying to caution everybody, but if he's playing in the first preseason game, and working the kinks out, yeah, I still think it's not going to be the red hot start to the regular season, but it might not be as slow of a start. There are outliers all the time physically. So
sure,
it depends on how much hype he gets and how high he climbs. But I think there's going to be enough caution out there suppressing it that I'll be willing to take a shot on him. I'm not sure where he's at right now, but playing in the preseason, I'm sure it will climb. So it just depends on how high that goes.
Yeah, I think he was regularly being as recently as a couple months ago, he was being drafted well outside the top 100. I mean, now his ADP is 80. So yeah. There's been a huge swing on Javonte Williams and what the expectation is, because every report has been, this recovery is nothing short of miraculous. And, right. And he looks awesome in practice. Everything has been glowing. And I think people have visions. What originally was the concern with Javonte Williams and why his ADP was so low was people had visions of a 2022 J.K. Dobbins. I feel like that was the correlation that people
Yep.
were making as to why they had concern about Javonte and therefore why they were out on Javonte.
2021 Saquon too.
Right. Yeah, sure. It's like these guys, they're coming back, but just, return to play doesn't mean return to form.
Right.
That was the initial concern with Javonte Williams. The difference between, say, Dobbins last year and Javonte this year was Dobbins was being drafted, I believe, in like the 6th round last year. People were
That
not
sounds
totally
about right.
fading
Yeah.
him.
Yeah.
This year, they were fading Javonte, I think, because Dobbins, if you drafted Dobbins in the 6th round last year, that did not work out at all. That didn't work out for you at all. And so people have, recency bias that they use to directly relate to somebody who has suffered a similar injury. The difference, I guess, here is the reports have been absolutely spectacular for Javonte Williams from the jump. And now it's expected that he's going to get some reps in the preseason.
Yep. And it's not just reports that we get all July long. It's he shows up to camp and he's practicing. He's not full practice, but he's not on the pup. He's actually out there. And then, that'll be the ultimate test to see what goes on in the preseason. But that's, the drum beat is growing.
So his ADP now, as it stands, let me double check Sleeper just to cross reference, but at least on Underdog, he has climbed ahead of James Conner, who I know a lot of people are actively targeting, ahead of Rachaad White, who I know a lot of people are actively targeting, ahead of Alvin Kamara, who is going to be serving a 3-game suspension, but significantly smaller suspension than I think a lot of people were expecting. Therefore, his ADP has also climbed. Ahead of James Cook, ahead of Isaiah Pacheco. And now we're starting to get into names where it's like, okay, this starts to make sense. Dalvin Cook still doesn't have a team. A.J. Dillon, Rashad Penny, Zach Charbonnet. These are all, 1B options in their respective backfields. So ADP of 80 on Underdog Fantasy, and it's pretty close on Sleeper now as well. His ADP is 77.7, so about 78. Mm-hmm. So going ahead of David Montgomery on Sleeper, going ahead of just naming running backs, going ahead of James Cook, going ahead of A.J. Dillon, Antonio Gibson, and going ahead of and Brian Robinson. I guess he's not going ahead of like DeAndre Swift, James Conner, Rachaad White on Sleeper, but he is on Underdog. So there's a little bit of variance there with running back ADP between the two platforms.
It's funny when you said Montgomery there, I had to go back and look, and I do have them literally back to back where I'm ranking them with Javonte one ahead of Montgomery right now. Okay. I think that comes down to, I think he has more of a chance of being a ceiling play. And to be fair,
makes sense.
I don't get the Samaje Perine stuff. Even when it looked like Javonte was going to be hurt or be out or slow.
Yeah.
I know he got volume in Cincinnati and he got some targets, but I don't think he's as good as people remember. I went back and looked at some of his stats, and I was like, "Yeah, that wasn't great." I mean, it was fine.
Like,
it was
what
fun.
Are people looking at?
Yeah, it was fun because he kind of came out of nowhere. He had a really a three-week stretch where he was a top 12 running back. I'm pretty sure that was when Mixon was out or at least hurt. The rest of it, I mean, it wasn't great. So, anyways,
sense. That would make sense. Yeah. And the hype was getting a little too much for Samaje, and his ADP was creeping up into the top 100 before these reports about Javonte started coming out. He was being drafted ahead of Javonte himself.
I have zero Perine in best ball.
Right, yeah. I mean, well, that's looking like a really smart,
feeling okay about it
investment.
Right now.
Yeah. That's looking like a good call. Because by all accounts, Javonte is, week one, if you had told me he was going to play week one and potentially get somewhere close to his full complement of snaps and touches, even if it's in the 80% range of what you normally expect from him at the beginning of the season, and certainly last year when the injury occurred, I wouldn't have bought that. I would not have bought that. But that just goes to show you, we can never truly chart. Each player is their own entity. It's their own situation and how they approach it and how their body is able to heal and recover. And also, I guess maybe how seriously they take it, or, it's some combination of all of these random factors that are difficult to throw on a chart or a graph in April or May, before we can actually see these guys. So it's really exciting for him. I'm happy for him. It seems like he's going to be able to give near, I hope, 100% of what he's capable of in a season where I think a lot of people previously weren't expecting. So his ADP has course corrected a sizable amount since the beginning of the offseason. You're going to officially have to spend a 7th round pick on him, and probably a little bit higher if he, all it takes is a couple of carries that go for 15, 17, 18 yards in the preseason, and all of a sudden he's a 6th round pick.
Yeah.
So
which is, again, where was he going last year? Was he a 3rd round?
I think
pick?
it was a 3rd. He was around the 2-3 turn is where he was being drafted. And so now I guess if you expect a healthy Javonte, even the 6th round,
even by midseason,
sure. Right. You're sitting pretty if you take that risk, so to speak. Yeah. So I think it makes a lot of sense. I told people last year, like on a pick per pick basis, swing for the fences. You can always try to course correct later on in the season in the form of trades or the waiver wire, but swing for the fences on as many picks as you possibly can. Go for the upside. You mentioned just a short while ago, Javonte feels like a ceiling play, that's starting to look like he can pay big dividends, even if his ADP continues to climb, say 10, 15 spots from where it is now.
Yeah, for sure.
So, draft Javonte Williams, people. Don't be afraid. He seems to, this is like the I'm not trying to, poo-poo J.K. Dobbins, but it feels like the anti-2022 J.K. Dobbins, which is what people were kind of correlating with Javonte earlier this offseason. So happy for Javonte. Should be good. And with Sean Payton, this will be the last thing. I mean, in New Orleans, that running back collection was regularly.
No matter who was there, they always
didn't matter. It was like New Orleans always finished like they were the collective RB1 group for fantasy every single year under Sean Payton. So wheels up on Javonte. Okay, so that's Javonte Williams. Don't be afraid to draft him, even if his ADP continues to climb. I think the last couple of guys you had that you're higher on the consensus. I think there's a decent leap here over the consensus. Are a couple more rookies, Achane and Tank Bigsby. I'm happy to hear your thoughts on this one.
It's very similar argument with Gibbs, only it's just a few rounds later, right? These are rookies. People are afraid to draft rookies, but rookie running backs tend to pay off at a lot higher value or a lot better hit rate. Achane, that backfield in Miami is so wide open. Like Raheem Mostert and Jeff Wilson, they do nothing for me. So it's a little concerning. I don't buy into all the hype that comes out of camp, but I haven't heard anything really out of Achane. I think he was dinged up a little bit, so maybe that's why. I saw he just
returned
got
to
back
practice
to practice
today. He just got back today, but he missed Saturday's practice. So he missed maybe like 1 or 2 practices.
And so the size might be a little concerning, but I know speed might be overrated, but he's one of the, literally Division I Olympic speed this kid has. And if there's going to be a team and a staff that I believe can scheme him up other than the Niners, it would be Mike McDaniel and the Dolphins. It just seems like such a good fit. So he's going, I think, really, really late last I've seen. And so he's a free pick with tons of upside.
Achane's ADP on Sleeper is 115. I'm pretty sure it's around 120 or so on Sleeper. I can check that.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess the people that have the concern about him is the size. He's 5'9".
And the Dolphins didn't have a lot of draft capital, and they, I think, spent a 2nd round pick on him. And then with Bigsby, the hype's been actually building quite a bit. But he was a player I liked his college tape. I think Jacksonville's offense can take a step forward. This is the NFL we live in for most teams now. Is you're going to have 2 relevant running backs, and I think. I'm not sure how the split's going to break down. I like ETN too, but I think Bigsby is just talented, and he's a lottery ticket worth having.
Travis Etienne was a pretty efficient runner last year, but for a guy who I feel like we were expecting a larger pass catching role from him, than what actually came to fruition.
Yeah, that was the weird thing. He didn't catch passes, but he also was not good at the goal line, which are two things that Bigsby could both be better at, which is
right.
Just it was an odd season for ETN.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's, that was kind of last year, his rookie season. He missed his true rookie campaign with the injury. Was it in the ACL? I think it was ACL.
A foot. I think it was like a foot injury, a Liz Frank or something.
Injury? Oh, okay. So maybe that was what got him off to a slow start in some of those key factors. But
yeah, I'm looking at his last season. Running back 37, 34, 30, 54, and then got hot 22, 19, 9, 7, 3. Then he was cold again for 4 weeks, and he was hot again for 3 weeks. It was just a real roller coaster of a season.
So a lot of peaks and valleys for a guy who's regularly being drafted in the third round of one quarterback leagues. Doug Peterson is his head coach, dating back to his days in Philly. Loves committees in the backfield, never really leaned on one particular guy. Now, of course, ETN has the first round capital to his credit, but that was an Urban Meyer pick, not a Doug Peterson pick. So that might unfortunately, well, from ETN's perspective, that might be out the window as far as something to lean on for him, as far as what we expect for his opportunity. Bigsby was a third round pick, but I mean, I'm just looking at it now. But I mean, with running backs anymore with their draft capital, you got to kind of give them a little bit of a curve, right?
Oh, for sure.
So a third round running back today is a second round running back 5 years ago.
I would say second and third are basically, I group them together.
Sure.
As day two. A day two pick is kind of the verbiage I go with now.
Yeah. You can kind of group those together because they all kind of fall into the same bucket from a value perspective there. So yeah, that's significant capital spent on a 6 foot, 215-pound guy who you would expect, should probably be a little bit better in those short yardage situations. And that potentially crushes ETN's ceiling as a fantasy producer. Just to go back to Achane, his ADP is 115 on both sleeper and underdog, or it's about 116 on underdog. So I mean, you can get him in the 10th round. Of a one quarterback 12 team draft. The only, I guess, concern is one that's completely out of our hands is, does Dalvin Cook sign there? And then
I know I'm just waiting for him to go. When he went to because I'm rooting for Achane too. I like the player. So when Cook went to New York and visited, I was like, okay, it's happening. He's not going to go blow up Miami.
Go there.
No, I don't know.
It makes sense for Cook, but also if he wants to win, I mean, either team, honestly, is probably, it looks like a contender, but maybe an Aaron Rodgers led team on paper, like quote unquote, looks a little bit more like a contender, even though the Dolphins, I think, have maybe a deeper collection of overall talent than the Jets do when you factor in offense and defense. And then plus it's a potentially more wide open backfield in Miami, and maybe that's a little bit more enticing for Cook if the Dolphins choose to pay him whatever he's hoping to get. But that is the only potential hiccup. But even there, I mean, Dalvin Cook last year, I think for the first time in his career, played a full season last year. And so while we can't predict, and we certainly obviously don't, nobody ever hopes for injuries or anything like that, but it's hard to expect that he, at this point in his career, is able to duplicate that. Yeah.
That repetitive shoulder thing too. It's not like it's a bunch of different freak things.
Right. Yeah. It's almost like from what I've read about shoulder separation injuries, it's kind of like a concussion in that each time it happens, the next subsequent one is worse than the last, so it's kind of playing with fire a little bit with Dalvin Cook as far as his potential health moving forward. So even if he does end up in Miami, I probably wouldn't move Achane too far down. I would buy the dip that would likely come with that.
Yeah, for sure.
And then as far as tank, just good offense, decent draft capital, coaching staff that didn't draft Travis Etienne. I can absolutely understand, and a team that should be in scoring position plenty with Trevor Lawrence running the show down there. Those are, I believe, the running backs that I think you're higher on the consensus. We're now moving into the guys that I think you're fading a little bit. I want to start, if it's okay, with a guy who I'm actually I was I was hammering quite a bit at first, but I'm actually coming around to fading myself, and that's Najee Harris.
Yeah.
Down,
And so
down a couple spots for you, I think, in
Yep.
consensus ranking.
Yeah, Najee's he's fine. I think it's
Sure.
again hard. Pittsburgh's gonna be better, I think, because it's gonna be hard to be as bad as they were last year. I think Pickett's gonna take a step forward, and yet with all these things, thinking their offense is gonna be better and that Pickett will be better, I don't think Najee's gonna be a whole lot different. I mean, I think he's still gonna be mainly a volume play. I'm not a huge Jaylen Warren truther. I know there's a lot of them out there.
Okay. Yeah.
But I think he's going to be enough of a thorn. And I don't know. I don't think he's a bad pick, but I don't see the ceiling. And in that area, there's other guys with a ceiling that I would rather take a shot on than Najee.
Got a ridiculous workload his rookie season. Caught a ton of passes from at that point in his career, like noodle-armed, dead Ben Roethlisberger.
Right.
And that might not necessarily be the case with a guy like Pickett, who's, if anything else, probably has a bit more of a lively arm as a second-year player than a 39-year-old Ben Roethlisberger does, who accumulated 1 million hits over the course of his career.
Yeah. Yep. I like Pickett getting better this year, and I love what I think he's going to do for Diontae and for Freiermuth. But those are really the only two guys I actually want in this offense.
The other thing with Najee that I kind of ignored for a little while, but any advanced metric that you look at, he's
not good.
He's like he's
Yes.
not even like he's bad, or it's not even like he's like in the lower half. He's like bottom. He's at the very bottom of like yards created for himself. He's heavily reliant on the play of the offensive line in front of him. And I mean, that's just not a recipe for consistent success. He might be fine as like a boring low end RB2, but I feel like he's being drafted with more hope and potential for that or than that. And I guess what I was originally relying on when I was drafting him as frequently as I was in best ball to start the season was, well, yeah, the Steelers offense was better in the second half of the season last year. So like maybe that momentum carries over into 2023. But if Najee's not efficient, then he's coming off the field for Jaylen Warren, who at least, I mean, I'm also not necessarily sure how much I feel about Jaylen Warren as far as being a truther, but he did look a little bit more explosive than Najee did last year at the very least.
Yeah. And I think if Najee gets, performs at his ADP or slightly higher, I think that's about your best bet. I don't think he is finishing inside the top 10, inside the top 8 running backs.
No, that's around the range where you're hoping you're getting a guy to crack the top 6, and I just don't see it.
Yep.
Don't see it. Okay, so I agree with you there. I was bullish on Najee, and I'll still draft him, especially because I think a lot of people are fading him. And so if he dips into the late 4th round, it's like, okay, if I'm strong at wide receiver, like, all right, fine, I'll roll the dice here. But yeah, I'm not going down and getting him in the 3rd round the way I maybe was a little bit earlier in the off season. Now there are a few names here that I think you are lower on than consensus. I'm not sure I'm in lockstep here on these, but definitely interested to hear your thoughts. I think you're lower than consensus on. We'll just start with, you're higher than Gibbs. Let's just go right back to the rookie well and talk about Bijan if you could.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's funny how this all goes. I think mainly this may be because I don't think the difference should be as far as it is between those two guys. And
okay.
I have no doubt Bijan is going to be good, that he is going to be a top 10, top 6 fantasy running back. So we're splitting hairs here.
Sure.
But I can't put Nick Chubb ahead of him. I can't put Derrick Henry ahead of him. It's just those guys that are their only path to not being good is injury. And Bijan is about as sure of a thing as but it's just that sliver of I don't know. So again, you have to have a certain pick to even have a shot at him. He's going to go in the 1st round. And if I'm late in the 1st round, 110, 111, and he's there and those other running backs have been gone, yeah, I will definitely consider him. I just don't. I'd rather have a couple other guys in front of him.
You mentioned Chubb, you mentioned Derrick Henry. Would you put guys like Saquon or the guy we talked about earlier, Tony Pollard, ahead of Bijan?
I actually do have Pollard. Saquon, I've got them
Okay.
like back to back right now.
Got it.
I'm a big believer in Pollard.
Oh, I agree. I absolutely agree. It just, I guess it's so easy, and this is why I love having these conversations. It's so easy to get sucked into ADP, and therefore it feels almost kind of icky to take Pollard over Bijan, if you know what I mean. Like, oh,
Yep.
well, Bijan's got an ADP of 9 or 8 or 9, and Pollard's got an ADP of 18. How could I possibly take Pollard over Bijan? But I mean, when the receiving work you expect Pollard to get, I mean, when you actually talk it out,
Yep.
it does make sense.
And if you're at 8 or 9, it's going to be one of those things where you could play the game and see if Pollard gets back to you, but who knows?
Sure. You can grab Stephon Diggs, AJ Brown, CD Lamb, and then hope that, it's like, well, I should be able to get one of these running backs with my second pick. Hell, maybe it's Bijan. If everybody,
Right.
It's certainly possible that other people go that route. They hammer wide receiver, and then, you get to your 204, 205, and it's like, there's an instance here and there where it's like, oh, wow, he's available here. And I've seen that happen. I've seen that play out, at least in a couple of best ball drafts that I've done. I do think I'm fine with Bijan where he is at, just because of the team that he landed on. Arthur Smith, who I feel like is the current everybody's favorite punching bag at head coach now that Nathaniel Hackett has since been fired. I mean, Arthur Smith loves to run the ball no matter what the situation is.
That's the thing, though. I've heard the narrative change on him a little bit from a lot of the sources I look at, and he does, and maybe a little too much, but he's really good at designing an offense that can run the ball. Algier, who I didn't think was a special player, had some pretty impressive numbers in that system.
Pretty good year, yeah.
Yeah, and
1,000 yards as a fifth round draft pick last year.
And honestly, that is a little bit of the trepidation I have too, because I'm not sure Bijan's going to get 80%, 70%. I think Algier will be mixed in. I don't think they want to run Bijan into the ground as a rookie. These guys are both young, both on their rookie contracts.
Sure. And I mean, even with obviously the narrative about drafting running backs high is certainly forefront at the conversation right now with how this offseason has played out. I have to imagine, this had to be calculated in some way where it's like, okay, we're going to take him here, but we don't want to kill the guy in his first 2 seasons. Yep. I got to imagine that this conversation had to have happened at length in the Falcons war room.
Yeah, absolutely. They had to have a plan. They know who Algier is, and they saw what he did, and they still went ahead with him. So again, splitting hairs a little bit here. I'm not saying that it's going to be even close fantasy wise, but I think that, Algier is a guy way late. I don't mind drafting him, especially if I don't have Bijan.
As a counter to the, maybe not necessarily, you're not grabbing him as a handcuff. You're just grabbing him as a standalone asset that can hopefully be valuable for you for a bye week, or if anything, of course, it happens.
I hate drafting handcuffs from guys on my own roster. Later in the season, sure, but at the draft, I feel like it's just kind of a wasted pick.
Is that in redraft? Is that in
redraft?
You feel that way? Really?
Yeah.
Okay. I feel like that's people when typically draft handcuffs. In redraft.
So I look at it again. I'm all about upside. So
sure,
that's a forward play. It's a safety play. Now, if I don't have Bijan and I grab Algier, and then in 3 weeks, God forbid, Bijan goes down.
Sure,
that manager is out of luck, and I just got a huge discount.
Right. Yeah. You could even sell high on Algier if you want to and get a much more proven player.
Yeah.
That's also a play.
We probably should mention that the official first depth chart came out today, and Bijan is listed 3rd string. So I mean,
okay. We love when they play this game. Oh, you got it. Yeah, right. You got us, guys. We'll take that bait. Oh, all right. Thanks, Atlanta. Appreciate it. Okay. I mean, I'm I'm certainly good with taking Bijan as a late first round pick, but I do find myself opting for wide receivers more frequently in that range just because of the running backs that are available. It's just like you said, playing the game. There are RB1 caliber players falling to the top to mid half of the second round this year. And for me, it's just like, I'll just take whichever one of those dudes is available to me after I lock in my stud wide receiver, who I probably have to opt for over Bijan. And that's just the way the cookie crumbles, you know? So that, I mean, I would say I am not as, I know we're splitting hairs here. I would probably say I'm fine with Bijan with that ADP of 9 or 10, but from that perspective, I'm not drafting him a ton. And then do you want to quickly touch on, I guess I think I get the thought process here potentially, but with Rachaad White, James Conner, Alvin Kamara, some other guys that you're down on, is that just because the teams are expected to be bad?
Pretty much. There's a lot of unknowns in all of them. I could be sold on Rachaad White. I just don't ever get him because of where he's going, I think. And there's enough unknown secondary player, sure. James Conner is an older player on potentially the worst offense in the league. And it's just like the unsexiest pick I can ever think of. And I want no part of it.
Older running back on a bad team. It's like, it feels like it's an obvious ticking time bomb. And yet there are a lot of people I see on Twitter, just in general, they're very in on James Conner.
New coaching staff too. So that's always you never know.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point.
Okay. I've never liked the argument of who else is there. Well, they can give other guys the ball. It is possible. They don't have to just run them into the back of the line 3 times in a row.
And there's still a ton of guys out there that they could sign. They could bring in Leonard Fournette if they really want to, or Darrell Henderson or Ezekiel Elliott. Like they could theoretically do this. Now, maybe a bad Cardinals team doesn't bring in a veteran name like that, but they will if they need to get through a couple of games.
They need bodies. Yep.
Sure. Yeah. So, and which is certainly possible given Connor's history. So, I will say I like Rachaad White quite a bit just because I feel like whether it's Baker Mayfield or Kyle Trask, they could just dump it off to him a million times this year as a safety valve. And maybe it's not a super efficient season for Rachaad White, but he just catches a ton of passes because of the quarterback play. And they're just looking for the quick, safe option because of who they are.
Yeah, that's going to be a fun team to watch because they got plenty of talented weapons on offense. It's just, do they have a quarterback that can run it?
Can the quarterback get those guys the ball? I do think they're capable. I think whoever it is capable of getting it to Rachaad White, and you know he's a young player who I think is a great pass catching running back. I think he had the best receiving profile of any running back last year coming. He was
up there
draft.
for sure. Yeah.
So for that reason, I'm still in on Rachaad White. But I do understand, you know, it's tough to trust running backs on bad teams. That's just the nature of the beast.
And I loved Kyle Trask coming out, so I'm finally I like Baker too, but just Trask is somebody I have always been intrigued by. So yeah, it'll be interesting.
Okay. See what happens there. And then I guess quickly on Kamara. I mean, obviously the suspension sets him back significantly. Yeah, it's only 3 games.
Yeah, and that changes it a little bit. His efficiencies numbers have been plummeting for I think 3 years in a row. Have been just going down. And granted, so that basically correlates to when Drew Brees left. So getting Derek Carr is an upgrade over who's been there, but it's not Drew Brees levels of upgrade. So I just again, he's aging. He's been dinged up. I'm just not. I guess I'm just totally out unless he falls a lot. But I don't see him as the Kamara of old.
And I think he's not falling. He's now going up because
people thought it'd be more of a suspension.
Right. People thought it'd be at least 6 games, if not longer. Now, you know, his ADP was 100. Now it's 80. I think people are excited about him because it's only 3 games. And so I guess for that reason, there's no way he ends up on any of your teams. As a receiver, still viable, but as a runner, it has been rough sledding for Kamara, you know, from an efficiency perspective. So I understand not wanting to take that chance on him. And if they're in on the running back market based on the rumors about Kareem Hunt, then they could still bring in somebody else. That just might continue to muddy the waters as
Yep,
far as Kamara's
I'm
potential
not
output.
huge on Kendra Miller, but I know a lot of people are. And again, just another
Another
variable.
body. And Jamal Williams, I mean, he's not going to score 17, 18 touchdowns again, but does he get those goal line touches?
Yep. Messy backfield.
Probably. Yeah, gross backfield. So that's fair. Okay, I think that covers the running backs. I know we got to be a little cognizant of time here, so want to get to these wide receivers. I'll just fire them off because these are all three guys I'm very bullish on. I think you are as well. Guys that you're higher on the consensus. So anybody listening, go out of your way to draft these dudes. Calvin Ridley, Jerry Jeudy, Diontae Johnson.
Yep. I'll like I said, touch quick on them. I'm
Sure.
all in on believing on Jacksonville's offense and Trevor Lawrence
Totally fair.
to the jump he made from week 1 or from year 1 to year 2 with with good coaching and just again year 2 in that system. This is maybe being a little bit of a victim of the camp hype and the videos you see, but if there was one guy that you wanted to see that from, it's Calvin Ridley, a guy who hasn't played. And God, I've seen the number 700 some days since his last game or whatever it is.
Sure.
But at the same time, there's not a lot of wear and tear on his body over that time. And we've seen him be the dude on a team. I just think he profiles as an alpha. If he can't, this is impossible to predict, but if he had never had to step away, where would he be right now? He could be up there with
round pick.
Yeah.
Second round pick, potentially a late first round pick. It's certainly possible. I mean, the guy's a spectacular route runner, great athlete. I mean, yeah, Trevor Lawrence in year 3, they spent capital for him. Like there's a thought process and a plan here for Calvin Ridley. I at one point bullishly declared him my wide receiver 1 going into the 2021 season, the wide receiver 1. That backfired, but I don't think my process was so off base there. It's just believing in talent, and Ridley has a ton of it. So
I was slow to get on board Ridley with the Falcons, but every year he just kept getting better.
Kept getting better. We actually watched him supplant Julio, real time when he was still on the roster before Julio fell off, which never thought was possible, but it happened. I think Ridley's a spectacular value with an ADP of around 35 or 36.
With Jeudy, I think Jeudy I loved him when he came out. He puts together spurts of just greatness, and he has been he had a combination of injury bad luck and team bad luck that I'm just betting on is finally going to go away this year, I guess, or just the cards will fall for him this year instead. Believer that Sean Payton is going to turn this offense around or at least make it league average, which is a pretty large improvement from where it was last year. If they're in league average, there's going to be a lot more points to go around. And I can't see Jeudy not being the focal point of the offense.
Came back last year after I think he missed a couple of weeks due to injury around like week 10 or week 11. And from weeks 12 to 17, I believe he was like the wide receiver 6 or 7 in fantasy points per game. So, I mean, this guy's got top 10 upside in my opinion. And if this offense is anything better than the train wreck that it was last year, which it should be under Sean Payton, I mean, I think Jeudy has separated himself as the alpha in this offense as far as the wide receiver 1, the top option in the pecking order over Cortland Sutton. Love the talent, love the big play potential. All of this offense needs is a little bit of stability, and I think Sean Payton brings that to the table. I am drafting Jeudy every opportunity I can with that ADP around 40 or so.
Yep, and I think not to get long-winded on this at all, but I just I think that Russell Wilson will be closer to what he used to be than what he was last year.
There's no way it can be worse.
No, it can't be worse. And I mean, I think it can be like significantly better. He actually, once Hackett was gone, he sneakily was not bad at the end of the year last year from a fantasy output, at least.
Okay. I actually might have missed that one. I think it was just it was so mirrored in such a terrible season that it feels like it was all bad, but it's not hard to believe that, There's plenty
So-
of room for improvement without him there.
Yeah, it's kind of garbage time at this point anyways, but if you want to count week 18, which I get if you don't want to, but if you count week 18,
No, you can.
he finished as a top 5 fantasy quarterback in 3 of his last 4 games.
There you go. That's
yeah.
all. That's that. Yeah, that's all it takes. You know, that's the proof in the pudding.
Touched on Diontae a little bit earlier. Diontae Johnson.
Yep.
The just screaming touchdown regression, screaming offense improvement all around, screaming quarterback step forward. I think I've been hearing this all offseason from anywhere you look. I still think his ADP is too low.
I agree. And follow the targets. I think he had, even with the switch to Kenny Pickett, I think he still had around 145 targets last year. I know everybody loves George Pickens, and rightfully so. He makes some exciting plays, some spectacular highlight reel catches. I get it. George Pickens is exciting. He's tantalizing. He's a second-year player that a lot of people are expecting a breakout from. But Diontae is all reliable in this offense. Yep. I've always been a Diontae guy. 0 touchdowns, like you said, is an anomaly. There's no way that happens again. Even if he ups it to 4 or 5, which I feel like is being somewhat conservative or conservative with projections. I mean, now you're talking about a guy who you wish you drafted in the 3rd round, and you're getting him in the 5th round. Follow the targets, follow the guys who have earned the targets. Diontae has proven that. I think he's regularly in the top 7 or 8 in the league in targets over the past 3 years. I'm not scared of George Pickens' potential emergence, and I'm not scared about, Kenny Pickett, 2nd year, only threw like 7 touchdowns last year, this, that, and the other. I'm buying Diontae once again, going back to that well. He's around cheaper than he was this year than he was last year. I feel like he gets back into that conversation of, this dude is a bona fide top 20 receiver in the NFL.
Yes. Yep. Absolutely
I'm in lockstep with all 3 of those guys. Happy to draft all of them slightly higher than where they're going. Happy to regularly draft Diontae specifically. I think his ADP is around 55. I'll take him 7-8 spots higher than that if I feel like I need to. Not afraid to do that. Couple other guys that I think you're higher on than consensus are 2 guys that I'm sure a lot of people they have question marks about: DeAndre Hopkins and Michael Pittman.
Yeah. So Hopkins, I believe Tennessee is, in fact, the fact that he went there, I like to see, because Tennessee is a good team, well coached. They're not going to throw the ball 600 or 700 times.
Nope.
But Tannehill can be an efficient thrower of the ball. Hopkins is going to have opportunities, especially in the red zone. So I don't think he's washed, and I like the landing spot. So I'm not sure. I was looking more at the ECR. I'm not sure where his ADP is right now, but I think that the fact that he didn't have a team for so long depressed it enough that it's going to be tough for it to climb back up. And so many people are on the narrative of Tennessee not running the ball or not passing the ball.
Right.
But they don't need to have the volume if the efficiency can be there. And he's always been an efficient receiver.
I covered this shortly after it happened. I did put a video out this on the channel. So right now his ADP on Sleeper is at 47. His ADP on Underdog is 45. So, you can comfortably wait until the 4th round to get a guy who, one, I know that he has missed time, injuries, suspension last year. I think he's only played 19 games the past 2 seasons. He's a wide receiver 1 in points per game in those games still. I know he's, on the other side of 30. And so that's another thing that people get concerned about. But we're talking about at one point, this dude was the best wide receiver in football. He's not going to fall off the same way some other guys do. And on top of that, to your point about the Titans don't throw the ball a ton compared to other teams. Well, when AJ Brown and Corey Davis were there, that was a wide receiver 1 and a high upside wide receiver 3 in fantasy points per game, with them only throwing the ball 450 times. So, I mean, Ryan Tannehill's a pretty good, efficient quarterback. We forget so quickly because he had like the worst offensive line to throw in front that was in front of him last year. And so with Treylon Burks and a hodgepodge of receivers after that, I mean, of course he struggled. Now he's got 2nd year Treylon Burks with DeAndre Hopkins. I mean, is Hopkins going to be the wide receiver 5 like Brown was a few years ago? No, but this is a huge step up from what they had to work with last year.
Yeah, he can absolutely beat his ADP. And that's what you're looking for there.
That's all it takes. So I'm with you on that. And then I do think I'm with you on Michael Pittman as well. If you're in on
so
Anthony Richardson.
Yep. I've been a Pittman truther for a while.
Yep.
I had an article came out late June, I think, early July, with the Ballers about the path it would take for Pittman to be a wide receiver one. And basically, I mean, last year he had, I think it was like the fewest amount of yards ever for a receiver with the amount of receptions he had. Like his ADOT was just pitiful. We know that's not going to be the case with Richardson. And then the other thing that really solidified this for me is, again, I'm going to name drop JJ Zacharyson again, because I listened to a lot of his stuff. And he did a study this summer on teams that run RPOs. So the run pass option. And with those, basically, either you're handing it off or you're throwing it to your one read. And Pittman's going to be that one read. So he should still be heavily targeted, have a high target share. It's not going to be crazy volume, but it should be enough to get him there. So I don't see, I think he's being left for dead because it's a rookie quarterback and it's a running quarterback.
Yeah,
but I think his target share is going to be just massive.
Got an ADP of 70 on Underdog Fantasy. It's around 69 on Sleeper. And I mean, I forget who tweeted this out. This is not my stat. I wish I could remember who it was, but basically the past couple seasons, Michael Pittman's quarterbacks
God,
no longer
that was in the article.
No longer in the league. They're no longer in the NFL. It's, Matt Ryan was bust last year, and Carson Wentz is begging for a job. So
Nick Foles played last year.
Right. Yeah. Nick Foles, Sam Ellinger, it was what was Michael Pittman supposed to do with that situation? So there's nowhere to go but up, even with a guy who obviously is going to take his lumps this year in Richardson. We expect that with rookies, but I mean, on top of that, he's the clear top guy in the pecking order. He should be peppered with targets. Maybe the ADOT is still a little low this year, but the opportunity should be pretty bountiful, I guess, so to speak, for Michael Pittman. And with an ADP of 70, that's nothing.
Pittman is my highest exposure underdog receiver. So
there you go. There you go. So those are the guys you are higher on the consensus. We'll quickly get to the guys that you're I guess lower on the consensus. And then we could probably wrap this thing up.
Sure.
Before I do that, just want to thank you for jumping on today, taking the time.
Absolutely.
This was awesome conversation. I'll make sure to timestamp this for everybody. We'll find that, for each guy that we had, that we spoke on, that we talked about. But a lot of fun, being able to do this today.
Yeah. Loving it.
Yeah. Awesome. So some guys that you're lower on than consensus. I'll start with a guy that I think I agree with you with, and that's DJ Moore.
Yeah. So it pains me because DJ Moore was another one of my guys.
I like DJ Moore. I do.
The footballers always do a my guy segment. The writers get to join in on that. He was a my guy. In 2019 or 2020, I planted my flag saying within a few years he will be the wide receiver one. And so I hate to put him lower than consensus now. I think that the scenery change for him is going to be good. I'm just behind him, or behind ADP, or behind the ECR at least, because some of the guys we just talked about, Pittman, Johnson, Jeudy, I have all those guys ahead of DJ Moore. I just don't see, I think he'll be fine.
Sure.
But he's not going to pay off where you draft him from what I expect.
He's topped out as a low-end wide receiver 2 on a per game basis for his career. Obviously, most of that is not his fault. He has dealt with putrid quarterback play in Carolina to this point. His ADP is 47. So that is that's about the 4th round, but that is ahead of Diontae Johnson. It's way ahead of Michael Pittman. It's ahead of some other guys that I'm very intrigued by: Jackson Smith-Njigba, Tyler Lockett, who is perennially underrated. I mean, I love Justin Fields. I'm excited for DJ Moore from an opportunity perspective, but this could be another low volume passing offense. Like, I feel great about Fields. I think Fields is going to be awesome as a quarterback. I think he's going to be fine. But
it's kind of funny because this mirrors the Richardson conversation so much. Because I think there's going to be a lot of RPOs. I think he's going to have a mega target share. He's just going so much earlier than Pittman.
Yeah, right. By 20 spots.
Yeah.
And his ADP is about 51 on Sleeper. So it's not an outrageous cost for a guy who can give you a top 24 season, but there's so many talented players at the position who are just in probably some more favorable spots that are in some more favorable offense as far as like volume is concerned, where it's just like, will he capitalize on this new opportunity? Just because, yeah, it's better. It should be, a grass is greener situation for DJ Moore. There's just so many guys going ahead of him where it's like, I want all of these guys going ahead of him. I don't know that there's maybe one or two guys that are being drafted ahead of him that I don't want over DJ Moore. And then like, to your point, there's multiple guys that are being drafted below him that I also slightly prefer.
Yeah, it's almost like it's the inverse. It's almost like a wide receiver dead zone this year, where there's all those guys in the first 2 rounds, and then it gets real murky for the next 4 rounds.
Yeah, rounds like 4, 5, 6 is that weird spot where that's where I'm willing to take my shots on Kenneth Walker, Aaron Jones. Guys going in that range. I mean, maybe you may not feel the same about Rachaad White, but that's where I'm like, okay, now I'm interested in this guy. So yeah, I mean, it's a weird kind of it does feel like an inverted draft this year relative to what we've grown up with as far as your plan of attack and your redraft draft. But, that's the ebb and flow of the NFL. And that's how, the people who play this game, the ones who adapt are the ones who are going to stay ahead of the curve. So that's what we're trying to do here.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then another guy I think you're lower than consensus on is Terry McLaurin. I'm interested to hear the thoughts on this one.
It's a very, very similar as the DJ Moore thing. These guys have had such a similar path in the NFL of just being great receivers and never getting the chance to play with a good quarterback.
Right.
The main difference is now DJ Moore does have what could be a good quarterback, and we have no idea with Terry.
Right.
And he also has another potential stud receiver on the other side of him, which is
a good point.
You can take either side of that argument. Okay, maybe he gets easier coverage, but also fewer targets. So I don't always love that argument, but I just feel like that's in the mix.
Sure. Terry does have back-to-back 77 catch seasons. He's gone over 1,000 yards the past 2 seasons. He just missed cracking 1,200 total yards last year, or 1,200 receiving yards, excuse me. 5 touchdowns the past couple seasons. Yeah, this is just not an offense that has consistently been in scoring position, and it's not. Yeah,
it's literally the same argument where I don't have him buried, but I've just those same names: Diontae Johnson, Pittman. I've actually got DJ just ahead of him.
Okay. And Hopkins is going 1 spot below him on Underdog, and I believe on Sleeper as well, or a couple spots below him. So yeah, there's just other guys here where, it makes sense. It's understandable. I guess I would say my one push for Terry is in this range is Najee Harris, Travis Etienne, and Joe Mixon from the running back perspective. Yeah, and I don't want any of those guys.
I'll take Mixon. But...
You'll take Mixon? Okay. I feel like his metrics were a little down last year, but if you like Mixon, then
they were down, but with and I won't go down the rabbit hole here, but
yeah.
Great offense. P. Ryan gone.
Sure. Makes sense.
I think he'll just have the opportunity to fall in the end zone.
Sure. He'll be fine from a volume perspective, if not an efficiency perspective. That makes sense. Okay. Yeah. Maybe I'm just a sucker for Terry's talent, and it's not even like, it's not been.
Oh, I get it.
It's not even been average quarterback play. It's just been crap quarterback play for him and DJ Moore. DJ Moore is in a much better situation, so it makes sense to maybe go a couple spots, reach down a couple spots on him over a guy like Terry. I guess I just want to keep believing in Terry, and maybe that's something that I need to move off of. Draft with your head, not your heart.
Yeah.
So I was interested to hear your thoughts there, just because I think when we originally spoke, I think maybe you were a little bit more optimistic on Howell. And I know that he's maybe kind of a seesaw quarterback right now. Like you go back and forth on a guy like him. And so, if you're ultimately kind of landing on, he's just remains a true unknown, then it makes sense why, you're to be a little bit more out on Terry.
Yep. That's pretty much what it comes down
at his cost. Makes sense. One guy I was a little surprised at how, I think it was like a 7 or 8 spot that you're down on, is T Higgins.
Yeah. So with T Higgins, great offense.
Mm-hmm.
Ja'Marr Chase is the clear alpha.
He's the dude.
Far and away. And I think so there's all this rhetoric about when Higgins leaves, if he'd be the wide receiver 1 on another team. And I think there are teams that he could be a wide receiver 1 on. But between these big wide receiver 2s that are getting drafted high, Waddle and Devontae Smith, I like both those guys better than Higgins.
Sure.
And again, it's another similar argument. I'm not burying him, but there are other guys who are or project to be number 1 receivers on their team that I would prefer to have. Keenan Allen, I've got ahead of him because I love what the Chargers project to be this year.
Sure.
Ridley, I have ahead of him. Same reason. I love what I think the Jaguars could be, and I think he'll be the alpha there. So it's he's not buried, but where I've got him at wide receiver 20. I think not buried, but I'm not going to get him there.
You're not gonna end up with any shares of him because he's being drafted as a top 15 receiver.
Right. Yep.
So I guess I would. This might be one where I do kind of. I might push back on this one a little bit. I do like T Higgins a lot, and I do actually prefer him. As I'm an Eagles fan myself, I have him over Devontae Smith, and Devontae Smith is awesome, but also Devontae Smith, I think, benefited last year from Dallas Goedert having missed 5 games in the middle of in the guts of the season.
Yeah,
like in that range of week 8 to 12 or somewhere around there, week 9 to 13, somewhere in there. And Smith saw a bit of a boon as a result of increased production when Goedert was out of the lineup. And while I love Devontae Smith and what he brings to the table, I guess maybe, and again, I love Jalen Hurts. Again, as from a fantasy perspective, I called my shot on him a couple of years ago, and as an Eagles fan, I naturally root for the guy. But I will take Joe Burrow as a pure thrower of the football over Jalen Hurts.
That's fair. The volume will be there.
Sure.
With Smith, and I've actually got like I said, I've got Smith a little bit higher. What I'm really curious with first of all, I think he doesn't get enough credit for as good of a receiver as he is. Devonta Smith playing next to AJ Brown. I just think his routes, and I know he's a skinny dude, but man, he plays bigger than that.
Plays big.
There's some stat that I heard the other day, and it had to do with how many plays the Eagles ran trailing in the fourth quarter. It was like minuscule.
Not a lot. Yeah,
that's
fair.
I don't think they're going to be, again, Bengals still, I'm sure, will pass more, but I think the Eagles will have higher passing volume than last year just because that kind of season doesn't repeat itself.
No, it doesn't. They have a much more difficult schedule. They will likely be trailing in the second half of games much more frequently than they did in 2022. That's certainly fair. The volume could easily go up for the Eagles, whereas maybe you say it stays stagnant for the Bengals.
Yep.
That's fair. That's a totally fair point. That makes a lot of sense in Devontae Smith's favor. For me, for T Higgins, back-to-back seasons of 185 half PPR points scored. And Ja'Marr Chase was out of the lineup a couple of times last year. So it's only fair if I make the point about Goddard being out of the lineup for the Eagles benefiting Smith. Chase being out of the lineup over several games obviously played into T Higgins' benefit.
And I should mention, Ja'Marr Chase is my wide receiver 1 over Jefferson. I've taken him at the 101 in best ball quite a few times when I get
I've done that too.
So,
I've done that as well. The upside is through the roof with Ja'Marr Chase, and and then I just believe in, obviously, Burrow is just better than Kirk Cousins by a wide margin.
Yeah.
So no, I've done that a number of times myself, taking Ja'Marr Chase over Justin Jefferson. That's not a reach by any stretch of the imagination. But then to that point, I want T. Higgins as well.
Sure.
I just expect that offense to be really strong. So I do think we're a little further apart on him than some of the other guys. I'm fine with taking T. Higgins as a top 15 receiver. But I understand, Chase is the dude for that offense. So of course it's fair to be a little bit more concerned about maybe Higgins's week to week consistency, assuming a full season of health for Ja'Marr Chase. So that's certainly fair. That's certainly fair. One more dude here that you're down on, or a little bit more down on other than consensus. And then I'm happy to let you go. Is Deebo Samuel. Just curious I feel like I've personally come around on Deebo a little bit in the past couple of weeks. So just interested to hear your thoughts on it.
I have started to come around on him in the last week or so. So let me not that much, I guess.
Okay.
When I first put this out there, I was 5 spots lower than him. I moved him up. Maybe others are moving him up too. So I moved him up, but it still says I'm 4 spots lower than ECR. So
okay, got it.
I like him, but I like Brandon Ayuk a lot. And
very fair.
I think Purdy's going to be the starter. And unless something happens, I think he's going to remain the starter. And I just don't think they're going to use Deebo as much. I mean, they reduced his carry load a lot last season.
Sure.
I know that's something he wanted in his contract. Rewind a year ago, he didn't want to be playing 2 positions as often. So he's going to have his games. I think all those guys in San Francisco are going to have their games. But if you're looking for consistency and ceiling, I think Ayuk gives a little bit better of that. I actually have Ayuk ranked 1 spot in front of Deebo, which makes me higher on Ayuk overall.
Wow. I would probably by a significant margin compared to consensus, because Ayuk's ADP is around 51, Deebo's is 33, so that's like a 20 spot gap. Pretty difference for Ayuk. Wow.
And see, I always, when I'm doing this, I look at a lot of my position rankings, but not at overall ADP. Yeah, that's if Deebo's at 33, I'm not going to have him.
Okay, fair enough. And, that's totally fair to be concerned about probably a severe cutback in rushing production, because last year they traded for the best running back in the NFL. So of course they're going to give Christian McCaffrey as much work as he can handle. I don't think Deebo totally goes away because Elijah Mitchell unfortunately can't seem to stay healthy. So Deebo feels like the change of pace guy, I guess, in the backfield.
Ty Davis Price season.
Okay, there you go. And the reports on him have been like, oh, this guy looks a lot better.
I joke, but I actually saw that report and I was like, I forgot about him. But San Francisco,
no way.
San Francisco does that. These guys just they churn out the running backs that produce.
They do bring guys out of the woodwork, and all of a sudden it's like, these guys are legit. Yeah, price just went up on Ty Davis Price, like, pun intended there, I guess. Okay, so you're pretty high on Ayuk. That makes that so that would that explains being a little further down on Deebo than most. I have warmed up to drafting him at that cost. I'm not reaching on him by any stretch of the imagination, but a health like Deebo is the yak monster of the NFL. And so I guess that's something, I guess that's that, when I reminded myself of that a couple of weeks ago, or maybe a month ago or so at this point, was kind of when I was like, all right, I need to go back to the well and get myself some Deebo shares. So, short, easy passes to me, is something that Deebo can turn into a huge play, any play. And you can't say that about every single player in the league. He's one of those guys, one of the select few dudes who can make something out of nothing, truly. And so for that reason, I'm willing to just kind of bet on talent here and there. He's not a guy I'm overly exposed to, but he's a guy that I admittedly am happy to take at cost, 33, 34 picks into a draft, especially if, again, that sweet spot for me for running backs is that 50-ish ADP range. Aaron Jones, Kenneth Walker. I know I can get one of those guys without reaching. Massive Aaron Jones fan, by the way.
I'm big on him also, for sure.
Love Aaron Jones. I know you said you were a Packers fan. I just gotta say, I've been a day one on that guy regardless. And I'm going back to that well on him again this year. I don't care. that
For
Aaron
sure.
Rodgers is gone. So for that reason, it's like, okay, I can pass on Najee. I can pass on ETN. I could, and I'm certainly passing on Josh Jacobs right now, a couple spots ahead of Deebo. Like, these are the running backs where it's like, I'm worried about you. I don't even know if you're going to show up, Josh. So I'll take Deebo here and grab Aaron Jones later. And so for that reason, it's like, this is why I'm okay with Deebo, and I'll lump Keenan Allen and of course Jerry Jeudy in that range as well. These are all guys I'm willing to grab. So I think I'm a little more willing to take Deebo than I think you are, but sounds like Ayuk is the guy for you to have in this offense.
Yep, I'll wait and get Ayuk, whatever
Okay.
is 15, 16 picks later.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, it might be even. Yeah, it's like 20. Yeah, 17, 18 picks later is where Ayuk goes. So, and he had 8 touchdowns last year. So if he can have another 5 or 6, I mean, should be. And he's plenty talented too, as just like an individual playmaker. He's a yak type of guy as well.
Another super fun offense to watch.
Yeah, should be really good. Honestly, no matter who the quarterback is, as long as it's competent quarterback play, this offense should be really good. That takes us through the quarterbacks, running backs, and wide receivers. We can pass on the tight ends. I might do I could do a separate segment on my own on tight ends to talk shop with the group on. I know you got to head out of here shortly, and we're coming up on 2 hours on this stream. So again, one more time for everybody, anybody who's come in late. First of all, thank you guys for coming in, hanging out, and watching and listening to us talk shop on these guys. I will timestamp this video with all of the guys that we covered today to make it a little easier to identify and find guys and get our thoughts on. Aaron, appreciate you taking the time and hanging out today. Yeah,
absolutely.
This is a lot of fun. Happy you were able to do this. Happy we were able to talk shop on some guys that you were higher on and lower on. Whole idea here, of course, you guys already know. Identify those guys that can make or break your draft for your upcoming redraft, which is for all of us happening in less than a month with the season.
It's a fun time of year.
Inching closer and closer. It's gonna be a lot of fun this season. Can't wait. Thank you so much, Aaron. Appreciate you guys of course, for coming in and hanging out. I'll be back Thursday, 6 p.m. Eastern for folks still listening. I will see you guys then. Everybody have a good start to your week. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.